Hello, music fans, and welcome to my channel. Today we're going to be talking about the greatest band of all time, and that band, in my opinion, is Queen. So we're going to talk a little bit about that through this video. But first, we're going to touch on a little bit of greatest of all time. Music, just like art, it's all in the eyes or ears of the interpreter. I'm not here to try to convince anybody that your favorite band isn't the greatest of all time. There's a lot of good choices out there. The Beatles, Led Zeppelin, Pink Floyd. You could touch down to even more individual genres or go for a Metallica, AC/DC. I mean, there's so many great bands that we've had over the years. We've been so blessed with so much great music. But in my opinion, and the argument I'm going to make today is that I believe that Queen is the greatest band of all time. So how do we determine that? There has to be things we can look at beyond just kind of opinion. Everybody's got an opinion, including myself, and this is why I'm here. Anyway, so I think it would be fair to say the greatest band of all time would have to have record sales to, you know, they'd have to have some mass appeal. And when you're looking at bands with all-time record sales, the top of that list is Beatles, Led Zeppelin's in there, Pink Floyd's in there, Queen is in there, the Eagles. It's really hard to get accurate sales on all these bands. So all these are estimations, but as best I could find, those five I listed were the top five sales by band. So we're not touching single artists here. There's no Elvis in here. There's no Michael Jacksons. There's no Princes. We're only talking bands with multiple members. So like I say, the five I listed were the top five selling bands of all time. So, I mean, it would be very easy just to take the top and say the Beatles, and you know what, that would be a great choice because when I was thinking about this video, it really came down to Queen and the Beatles for me, what I think to be the greatest of all time. But I think there are reasons why I think Queen edges ahead of the Beatles a little bit, despite how influential they are and how iconic they are and the amazing music they put out. Sgt. Pepper's, for instance, I think is one of the greatest albums of all time. Another band on this list, Pink Floyd, Dark Side of the Moon is another one of my all-time favorite albums. I mean, all these bands, I mean, you couldn't go wrong with any one of them, but we're here to try to choose one. So again, we look at record sales, Beatles at the top of the list, Led Zeppelin, Pink Floyd, Queen, the Eagles, all great bands. But doing this research, I found something that was quite strange, and I think this actually works in Queen's favor. So let me touch on that a little bit. All the bands I listed there, if you take the American market, which is far and away the largest in the world, and probably the one market that any band wants to conquer, because that's really what drove record sales, especially pre-internet, when you had to go down to the record store, you had to actually pick your record up off the shelf and or CD or whatever. Unlike nowadays, we can download music at a touch on our phones, on our PCs, on our it's just the access is so available. But one thing I noticed is in the North American market, all four of those five bands I listed were all in the top 10 US record sales. And the only one that wasn't there, and they're like way down the list, is Queen, which is, well, when you when you consider the American market, and those of us who live in America and have been around long enough in the kind of following the music scene, the American market's very fickle. They don't like bands who kind of go outside of expectations. So you look at a band like Led Zeppelin and or Pink Floyd or any of the ones I listed, the Eagles, there's an expected sound that comes from them, and in order to kind of maintain longevity in the American market, you kind of got to feed them what they want. They're not really open per se to new things. I mean, I think a good example of that more recently would be Metallica, when they kind of got away a little bit from the heavy metal edge, and they cut the hair down, and they did kind of a pop album, and there's a little bit of a rebellion, not so much as say Queen had with Hot Space, but I think what that tells me though is worldwide, and when you're considering the greatest band of all time, you have to go outside just the big markets. You have to see worldwide influence. All those bands, with the exception of Queen, had pretty much half of their record sales in the U.S. market. Whereas Queen would, like I say, they were, on one list I saw they were like 34th, although that did include solo artists as well. So, but that I think that what that tells us, in order to be a top five band in record sales all time worldwide, you have to have Queen had a lot of their influence outside of America. So my argument is that they reached a wider audience, uh, more countries, and were top sellers, where they might have missed out on the U.S. market. They really made up for it on the international market. Best I could tell is in America, Queen sold about 35 million albums, which I mean really quite surprised me. I thought it would be a lot higher than that, especially when they had about 200 million worldwide. So you're only looking at about 25-30% of Queen's record sales were within the U.S. market. So if I could extrapolate that, if Queen kind of stuck to a sound that was successful in America, I think you would see probably total sales would be up there closer to like Beatles level. Because even the Beatles, like all these bands had 50% or more of their record sales coming out of that US market. So the fact that Queen was way down there and still managed to maintain such a high level worldwide, I think it's really telling that they weren't focused on a market and that they were accepted worldwide in more cultures, more countries, more, foreign ears that aren't used to um, are more used to diverse sounds, I guess, right? So again, when we're trying to determine the greatest of all time, we can't just go by record sales because it only tells a small picture. I mean, you don't even have to be that particularly great of a musician. You just have to have a good sound. Like a lot of the solo artists nowadays are have huge record sales, but I'm not going to get into individual artists, but I mean a lot of the music is kind of just fluffy. I mean it's made simple. The beats are simple, the choruses are simple, and I think that's what a lot of people like. Especially when they're just they're driving in their car, they just want to be able to bop to a beat, and I think that's a bit of a lot of people say they don't make music like they used to make music, and I think what they're saying there is there's no real experimentation anymore. So many bands are sampling off of older bands or older songs, and the originality just isn't there anymore. So in order to see, when we see a lot of these older 60s, 70s, and 80s bands with these incredible record sales, it's they were driven. You had to put out good quality music because it wasn't easy to sell an album back then like it is now. You didn't have all these video channels promoting, and like I say, ease of access. So again, I think Queen is up there. Along with any of those bands, all would be great choices for the greatest of all time, but we have to narrow it down a little more. So on this one, the Beatles were the top selling of them all, and that gives them an edge in this category. But I think we're going to go a little deeper. So after that, I think we have to look at songwriting. And Lennon and McCartney, again, I mean, they're iconic songwriters. Elton John, Bernie Taupin, they're another great duo, but again, that's not really a group. But I think, Led Zeppelin, they had great tunes, but they had a lot of controversy um, in their careers as far as sampling music from others. In fact, they were sued. I remember watching a documentary once. I don't know if it was Stairway to Heaven, but I heard the song that they apparently ripped off, and it was pretty darn close. So I don't want to, we have to look for reasons to discount. So I think in this category, I think Led Zeppelin kind of slides out a little bit. And then we get to like Pink Floyd, and Pink Floyd is, I mean, they have a Pink Floyd sound. If you like Pink Floyd, you're going to love most of what they do. But I don't think there's a lot of diversity there. I don't think the music writing per se is all that amazing. What Pink Floyd really uh, excelled at is making theme albums, like albums that really fit together, and it really is a talent. I think they're probably the best in the business at doing that. Um, again, the Eagles, very more poppy sound. Uh, Again, they're probably the band that was most U.S. Sales driven. I don't think they had the international appeal. Again, their songwriting was good. They had some great songs. But again, Lennon, McCartney are the first one that comes to mind, and May and Mercury. I think they're right there. I don't think they're that far behind Lennon and McCartney as far as songwriting goes. And you look at it, go through the Queen catalog. Those of us who have heard the whole Queen catalog, I mean, there's some tremendously written songs in there that most people have never heard of. A good example of that one was on my list of the 10 most underrated Queen songs, and that's a Prophet Song by Brian May. I mean, that's just a tremendous piece of poetry. And Mercury's well known. We all know the Mercury songs. So again, in this category, for me again, it's the Beatles and Queen. They're kind of going neck and neck, and that kind of leads us into our next category, which is iconic songs. Like, how did these songs translate? And again, Beatles have had some tremendously iconic songs, but this is a category where I think Queen really begins to separate themselves from the other groups. You look at a song like Bohemian Rhapsody. I mean, this is a song that's charted in three completely different decades. The only other performer that I know that has charted the same song in three different decades was Prince, and that was his Purple Rain. I think it was Purple Rain. Anyways, it was a song off of the Purple Rain album, and that charted in the 80s, the 90s, and I think just early in the early 2000s. But you look at something like Bohemian Rhapsody. I mean, you're looking at the 70s and then the 90s, and then just recently again with the release of the Bohemian Rhapsody movie a couple of years ago. I mean, that's truly tremendous. I mean, even the Beatles, I mean, they've had no song that's charted like that. Led Zeppelin, I mean, all their success was all in when they were really relevant in the 60s and the 70s. So to have a song like Bohemian Rhapsody chart like that is truly phenomenal. And that's credit to Prince as well. And we'll talk a little bit about Prince in a future episode, as I'll dabble into a little bit about solo artists doing something very similar to what I'm doing now for groups. And then of course, We Will Rock You. I mean, who doesn't know We Will Rock You? I religiously watch all these reactions from other people. I love them. I get home at night and I type in my Queen reaction, and I see whatever anybody's doing recently, and it's amazing how many of these people didn't know it was Queen, but they knew the song. Even if they didn't know the whole song, they would always know, the clap, clap. Psh. Everybody knows it. It's iconic. Every stadium, um, every sports event. It's just, again, it's just woven itself into the fabric of society in a way that I can't think of any other songs that have done this. And then We Are the Champions. It's the same thing. It's become a part of not just pop culture. It's just become a part of society. When people think of championships, I mean, this is the kind of song that pops into their head. So I think in this category, Queen is really almost on a level of their own as far as iconic music. I can't think of any other songs. I mean, there's stuff like, Billy Idol's Mony Mony or White Wedding. I mean, you can't go to a wedding without, that being part of the reception. Everybody gets up and dances and has a good time, and it's iconic in its own right. But again, it doesn't reach the levels of, Bohemian Rhapsody, We Will Rock You, We Are the Champions. Those three songs alone are probably three of the most iconic songs ever written, and they're all done by one band, and that band is Queen. So where do you go from there? Well, influences. Does the music has the music influenced other bands? And absolutely. I mean, Beatles, possibly the most influential band of all time. Led Zeppelin, very influential. The thing is with, say, Led Zeppelin, and I don't know. I mean, the Eagles, a lot of their music has been solo. The band, the members of the Eagles would branch out and do solo projects. So it kind of it's hard to tie those in. It's a little complicated for me when it comes to the Eagles because a lot of the best music written by the members of the Eagles was outside of the band. Um, Pink Floyd again, Led Zeppelin, like I say, they're influential, but they tend to be influential within a genre. Every heavy metal artist, every thrash metal artist, anything like that, they're going to always go back and, Led Zeppelin is always going to be an influence, and without a doubt. But again, with Queen, because they were so hard to kind of pigeonhole, like if you ask somebody what kind of music Queen wrote, you would get a lot of different answers, and probably most commonly you would get people who couldn't really place them into a genre because as the years went on, they really changed their music. They started out almost kind of hard rock, slid into a little bit of prog rock, and then they started getting a little more radio friendly music. Eventually, by the 80s, here they had pretty much transitioned into a pop band. But again, with every album, and again, especially through the first maybe 7 or 8 albums, I mean, even with an album, you couldn't really. I mean, is that a rock album? Is that a prog rock album? I mean, it was very difficult to categorize Queen into a genre. And I think because of that, they really influenced more than just rock musicians. I think they actually influenced a much wider range of musicians, even outside of mainstream rock and roll. That the other bands, with the exception of maybe the Beatles, ever did. So again, I keep going back to Queen and the Beatles, and this is why I said at the beginning it was very difficult for me to really choose. And there's only one category that we're coming up to, I think, which really separates them, and I think it separates Queen from all those other bands. And again, just let me say, if you think Led Zeppelin's the greatest band of all time, absolutely. They're just I love them. I've heard every album more times than I can count. Same with all these top selling artists. The only band on this list that I never really got into myself was the Eagles. I mean, there's been a lot of great Eagles music that I've liked, but I've never really. It's the one band on this list that I never would really sit down and put an album on and listen to start to finish. But I can't hold that against them. If there's Eagles fans out there who think they're the greatest of all time, again, I'm not trying to change your mind. I'm just trying to make the argument that Queen is up there and, in my opinion, on the top of that list. So yeah, when it comes to influencing music, I mean, you go back to the Freddie Mercury tribute concert, for instance, and people you would never expect, like Axl Rose and George Michael and Elton John. I mean, even Liza Minnelli. I mean, really, uh, loved Freddie Mercury and loved Queen, and they were just so influential in so many facets of life that again, I got to give the edge. Um, I've got to give the edge to Queen as far as influence goes. So again, what else can we look at when we're considering the best bands of all time? Musicianship. How were they influential with their instruments? Are they considered one of the greats? So let's start at the top of the list. Go with the Beatles. Great musicians, great minds. They had great musical minds. But I don't think, when you're talking greatest guitarists or greatest drummers, I mean, I just don't think any individual member of the Beatles really excelled necessarily at musicianship. I don't think that they really influenced a lot of people. I mean, their music influenced people, but I don't think you weren't thinking, boy, I'm playing the drums. I'm a young drummer. Who's my influence? I mean, Ringo Starr just generally isn't one of those names. You're going to hear names like John Bonham. There's some tremendous. Same thing with guitarists. There's just so many tremendous guitarists out there. And I remember I guess it was last year, Brian May had been nominated for the greatest guitarist of all time. And I remember when I first heard that, I remember, oh, there's going to be a lot of Jimmy's rustled over that one, because even I mean, I don't know if I'd consider Brian May the greatest guitarist of all time. But again, it's almost kind of like the way I look at Queen with other, when I'm comparing them against other rock groups or bands. Sorry, it's just, I guess it's the, when you're looking at the greatest of all time, is it technical? Is it, because Brian May probably isn't the best technical guitarist out there. I mean, there's Stevie Vai, Eddie Van Halen, Yngwie Malmsteen. I mean, again, I mean, it's a list so long. I could read off a list of probably 30, 40 guitarists that could have a good argument for being the greatest guitarist of all time. So how did they decide on Brian May? Well, I think it's because it's the body of work. And it's the stepping out of a single genre and being able to create music, like the amount of riffs and licks and solos that Brian May's produced that are just kind of unique and over the years is just phenomenal. And I think that's ultimately why he was nominated as the greatest guitarist of all time. It's not because he was the best shredder or he is technically the best. It's just, you know, it's the volume. It's the volume of quality guitar sounds that he produced over time. It's just it's hard to argue against it when you look at it in that way. I mean, even Jeff Beck, I remember way back in, like, I think it was the late 80s, early 90s, they were asking him about Brian May, and he called him the governor because he was just the greatest. I mean, the licks that he that other guitarists would pick up from Brian May and sample Brian May and influenced by Brian May. I mean, maybe he wasn't the popular guy to brag about. Maybe it was a lot cooler to say, a Jimi Hendrix, who is probably possibly my favorite guitarist. And again, I mean, Brian May had influences. I mean, I'm sure Brian May probably wouldn't pick himself as the greatest guitarist of all time. So whether or not you actually agree with that, I mean, the work is there. I mean, it's just a tremendous amount of guitar riffs and solos that he put together, and it's just, yeah, it's tremendous. Same thing with Freddie Mercury. I mean, again, is Freddie Mercury the best technical singer? No. In fact, a lot of times, if you ever listen to Freddie Mercury when they pull his audio tracks out, so it's just, you just hear Freddie Mercury, he's kind of a little bit all over the map. And same thing with his vibrato. He's got this incredibly fast vibrato, but it was not consistent. He wasn't a technical singer. He never had formal training. I know a lot of people have a hard time believing that. I was going to do a video on debunking Queen myths, and that is one of the Queen myths that I keep reading people talking about how Freddie Mercury's been classically trained. It's like, no, 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 no. I mean, it's pretty obvious that he hasn't if you really listen to him. But what Freddie Mercury had over, I think, any other singer in rock is the connection, the emotion, the way he could connect his tone to any style of music. I've heard lots of people say, Freddie Mercury could sing the phone book and it would sound fabulous. And I have no doubt that's true. He just had a way of drawing you in. And again, I mean, his vocal range was tremendous. You listen to something like Cool Cat when he's doing his falsettos, and then he's got those songs where he pulls out that kind of gravelly, kind of hard rock tone, and it always just matches beautifully for the sound they're trying to create. And because Queen had such diverse sounds and they had so many different genres they kind of dabbled into, that was really important. You had to be able to do that. You had to be able to connect with the music. And Brian May's guitar and Freddie Mercury's voice, They were like twins. It just matched, and it just created such a magnificent sound again that I don't think any other singer, rock singer, can touch. There's guys like Axl Rose. Axl Rose actually had a greater range than Freddie Mercury did, but his tone was always um, very similar. Um, Even his high notes, you could tell it was Axl Rose. It was indistinguishable. Same thing with Robert Plant. I mean, his tone matched Led Zeppelin perfectly, which is part of what made Led Zeppelin so phenomenal. But he wasn't particularly diverse. So that's one thing I think Freddie Mercury had over all of them, and you know, and I think Freddie Mercury is the greatest rock singer of all time. And again, it's not because he was technically the best; it's because his enunciation, the way he would sing, it was clear. It didn't matter what he was singing; you could hear the lyric, even if it was live. And well, we'll get into live a little bit later. So, anyways, Brian May, Freddie Mercury, whether you agree or not that they're the best at their craft, they're certainly in consideration. And I think anybody would have to admit that, whether you actually like them or not, you have to admit that they were masters at their craft. And then that's not even getting into like Brian May's tone of his guitar, the fact that he made his guitar. um, it's really quite amazing when you think about it because, Brian May's guitar was homemade. It was made from parts around the house. So I wonder how much that guitar cost to build. Take the labor out of it and just think how much that guitar probably cost to build. Probably not much, probably a few dollars. I don't know if they actually had to go out and buy stuff. I'd imagine they did for winding the pickups and that, but I mean, it didn't cost a lot of money. And then you look at John Deacon's Deaky amp that he built, which really layered on more opportunity for the red special to really shine. And that was built out of, like, for the most part, it was built from an old transistor radio that John Deacon found in the trash. So you've got two of the most iconic pieces of musical instrument, probably made for a combined price of a lunch. And they're both just priceless pieces of art now. And that goes a lot. I think that ties in a little bit to the musicianship as well. You have to have the ear for these things. And so let's touch on John Deacon, and we'll touch on John Deacon and Roger Taylor together on this one, because I don't think either one of them would ever be considered the greatest at their craft. But one thing they were is they were consistent. Especially for rock music, the foundation of rock music um, is bass and drums. What makes rock music is guitars and vocals. I mean, that's really what differentiates rock music from any other genre, is just the way the singer sang and the way the guitar is played. But in order to do that, you need a good solid foundation to keep all that together, to keep it kind of harmonious. And that is something that John Deacon and Roger Taylor have always done. They've always, I think John Deacon is probably the more underrated of the two. I don't think a lot of people talk about John Deacon's bass skills. But again, I mean, you look at his songwriting, and let's actually touch on songwriting, which you already have. Let's go back to it a little bit. When you're talking about bands, this is a band who all four members have written number one songs. I don't think that's ever happened before. And that alone is just, that sets them apart from the others. John Deacon has written some of the most iconic bass lines, sampled many times. So whether or not, these guys are technically the best at what they do, they added an element to the band that went beyond just their musicianship. They were actually songwriters as well, and in Roger Taylor's case, a tremendous singer. I mean, a lot of what separated Queen and what made people have a hard time kind of pigeonholing them into a sound is that the harmonies and the diversity of the vocals. I mean, Brian May, Freddie Mercury, Roger Taylor, all very distinct tones to their voices, but they all tied in so well. So again, going back to musicianship, John and Roger might not get the respect they deserve per se as far as being good at their craft, but what they added to the Queen sound and capable of again switching genres on a whim, and again, tremendous songwriters. It's just you put it all together, and it's hard to argue that there's another group out there that can compete with that. It just feels like it's on a different level. So where have we been so far? We've been on record sales. We've been on songwriting. We've been on musicianship. We've touched on iconic music. Um, where else could we? Well, let's touch on a category where I think this is where Queen really separates themselves above and beyond all the other groups, and I think probably the main reason why I think they're the greatest band of all time, and that is live performances. Now, again, let's touch on the other bands a little bit. The Beatles. They used to play in front of massive crowds, and these crowds would just be going nuts the whole time. Like I've never seen anything like it. Not before the Beatles, not after the Beatles. There are places like when Queen first went to Japan, for instance, they got a little bit of that kind of reaction where people were just like losing their minds. But I remember, I think it was Paul McCartney, I want to say. I remember seeing an interview with them where the Beatles would literally just stop playing in the middle of their concerts and just kind of lip sync and just pretend they were playing, and the fans were just going so nutty that they didn't even realize they had stopped playing. Like the Beatles were never really a great live band. They were a studio band. They were geniuses, musical geniuses. The creative processes that would go through, especially Lennon and McCartney, who were really the drivers of the Beatles. George Harrison wasn't too bad. Ringo as well. Ringo's Ringo. Um, but they weren't really known as a great live band. Led Zeppelin did. Led Zeppelin had some great, great live music. But I think that their window was relatively small. Like you look at Led Zeppelin at Live Aid, for instance. They hadn't played together for a long time. They sounded well. Again, I mean I love Led Zeppelin, but they sounded horrible, absolutely horrible. Robert Plant just you know but I have to go back, and when they were in their prime, they were um, they were a tremendous live band. And but I'm going to knock them down. I have to look for reasons to pick the greatest band of all time, and I just don't think the longevity. Again, the wheelhouse, that window of opportunity. Led Zeppelin was absolutely tremendous, but they never really achieved the levels, the live performances that some of the other bands did. So I'll go on to Pink Floyd. Just a tremendous concert. These guys are great. If you ever get a chance to see Pink Floyd, definitely go see them. They were one of my favorite concerts. Um, but again, a Pink Floyd concert was, how do you, I don't know, a spectacle. I mean, I don't know how to say this. It was a very visual driven concert. It's the kind of concert you would go and you get baked or whatever your drug of choice was, and you would just go there and just kind of sit in awe. And they always had those wailing guitars, and yeah, I mean it was a great concert. Um, but it was, like I say, it was almost more of an event. I don't know if that makes sense to you. But they were not necessarily performers. They were almost like more like almost like a stage act. So again, not to take anything away from them, I think that's giving them high praise, actually. Um, but they were just, yeah, it was just a different kind of concert. Like I say, it was an experience. You would go there for an experience. I haven't seen a lot of Eagles live. I presume that, they were pretty good. I mean, if you loved Eagles music, you were gonna love Eagles concerts. But, from what I remember and the little bit I've seen of the Eagles, they were pretty much guys who would go up there, stand in front of the mic and sing. And, there wasn't a lot of performance per se. They didn't put on large stage shows. As far as I know, they've never really had any real kind of iconic live performances. So again, not to take anything away from the Eagles, great band, but they again, much like the Beatles, I think they were more of a studio band. They weren't necessarily a live band on, say, the level of a Led Zeppelin or a Pink Floyd, or as we get to Queen. And Queen, even in America when they weren't particularly popular, I remember in 1982, of course, after their Hot Space album, Queen was kind of shunned a little bit. I mean, Queen fans were a little taken back. They were always used to Queen experimenting and doing different things, but I think this was just kind of a turn that a lot of people didn't expect. So, but it didn't stop them from like selling the house out in every show. I mean, when Queen came to town, you got your ticket. You raced out as quick as you could because you knew that it was not just a concert. It was the music. It was the lighting rigs they used to travel with. Freddie Mercury live, of course. I mean, we've all seen the videos by now. The Somebody Loves, the White Queens. Like this whole band were built to perform. Unlike the other four bands that we've been talking about, they're the only band that I would say might have excelled live over the studio. Because in the studio they're very experimental. They love to deal with like multi-tracking, and they really push technology forward with their studio work. If I recall correctly, that the whole point to going to 24 track recording was basically driven by Queen because they kept like running the tapes almost transparent because of all their overdubs and stuff, and they really pushed technology forward with their recording. But when they'd go live, they didn't have that. They couldn't reproduce a lot of those things, so it kind of forced them into a different kind of, almost a different kind of style for their music. They had to really amp it up a little bit and turn it into a little more of a rock show. And it's just like I say, it was all the things that all the other bands were. You had the crazy crowds that the Beatles would have. You had that like peak that Led Zeppelin would have, where you just go there and just have such a good time, and just that sonic experience would just make your ears so happy. They had the kind of the spectacle that somebody like Pink Floyd would offer, because like I say, their lighting rigs were tremendous. In fact, when Queen went out on the road, they generally always lost money. I think it was the '86 tour, their last tour, was the one tour that they actually made some money on, and that's because they were playing in front of such large crowds. For the most part during the 70s and the early 80s, Queen, they were playing in like hockey arenas, not soccer stadiums. So they were playing in front of 13 to 22, 25,000 people. And when you're hauling around some of these lighting rigs they've had, I could imagine that, yeah, that's got to cost a lot of money. Um, and then of course, you hit on Live Aid, which is, widely regarded as, the the best live set in history. And in front of the largest viewing crowd with all the biggest bands of the day, uh, past and present, they were all there. I mean, this event was on a level unseen before. Even Woodstock couldn't touch this kind of event. And what did Queen do? They went out there and they just killed it. They just you know they just they took that crowd and they brought that entire event to a new level. And word around the campfire is, the other bands talking in behind there are like, oh, we may as well just pack our bags and go home because Queen just absolutely, obliterated it. They just absolutely stole the show, and that's what Queen did. And I think, for no other reason than that, I put Queen ahead of all other bands as far as the greatest of all time. I think it's undeniable. You've got possibly the most iconic song in history in Bohemian Rhapsody. You've got We Will Rock You, We Are the Champions that are woven into society in a way that no other music has really done. Um, They're songs as popular today as they were 40 years ago. No, and no other band, no other band. Not I'm not talking about the five that I've been touching on. There's just no other band that's had such iconic music as Queen. So when you put it all together, you put, record sales, you put influence, you put musicianship, you put songwriting, you put, you know, iconic songs, you put um, the live stage, you put all that together. The fact that Queen was just so absolutely diverse, it really branched out. It really made them probably the most popular band in the world as well. Just 'cause, as I noted before, their record sales weren't driven from the largest market in the world. Their record sales were driven by having mass appeal across culture, across language. When they went down to Argentina in 1980, or was it 81? I mean, they played in front of 131,000 people, which at the time was the largest paid audience ever to go see a group. They really kind of drove stadium rock. They let everybody else know that, bands can sell out these massive stadiums. They don't have to be touring through these smaller arenas, sometimes playing 4 or 5 consecutive nights in New York or LA just so everybody could get their music fill. They could kill these big stages. I've seen a lot of bands go out there in front of large crowds and they don't have the charisma. They don't have the connection that Freddie Mercury and Queen did. So yeah, all those things together are my reasons why I think Queen is the greatest of all time. So my last note on that is what's coming up now is I'm going to finally, it's only been a year and a half, I'm going to finally get into the album reactions, and that's going to kind of be the second half of my argument for Queen being the greatest of all time, because this is when we're really going to be able to dig in to the musicianship. We're going to be able to really dig into the diversity and why Queen was so influential worldwide across genres. Um, and yeah, so there we go. I'd love to hear who you think is the greatest band of all time. Like I say, I'm not here to bash you over the head with Queen. If you think somebody else is the greatest of all time, I want to hear it. Send it down in the comments. Let me know. I want to get this channel up and going again. I've been working a couple of jobs the last year and family, and we've adopted a lovely new dog who's been a new member of our family since December. I'll bring her down and introduce her at some point. She's upstairs sleeping right now. So I've had a pretty busy year, and I've been trying to get back into this, and then it just kind of snowballs, and before you know it, so much time has passed. So yeah, I want to get back into it. I want to get into these music reviews and album reviews, sorry. Uh, but unlike before, where I wanted to stay purely a Queen music channel, I want to dabble. And by dabble, what I mean is maybe, a couple of reactions a week that aren't Queen. So if there is music out there you want me to listen to and react, please also put that in the comments. Do the usual subscription thing. I never used to care about subscribers, but I think I'm going to take a slightly different attitude this time around. I think I want to get a little bit more of a mass appeal. I want to start hearing a little more music. I mean, my music basically goes up to about 2010. Like in my head, Tool is still a new band. You know what I mean? It's so if there's some other bands, more current bands you would like me to react to, I would love to hear those. I want to expand. I knew so much music. I was so into music for so long, and then it just, there was a time when it just stopped. So there's just so much music, and I'm sure so much good music that I haven't heard, especially more recently. So again, if there's anything in that vein you want me to hear, it doesn't have to be rock music. It's whatever you think I might like to hear, and I'm pretty open-minded when it comes to music. I've dabbled over the time in classical and new age, and all the rock type genres like the punk music and surf punk music, Red Hot Chili Peppers, Offspring. I've had a pretty diverse ear as far as music goes, and I just want to get back into that. I want to get back into the rhythm and really, start making something of this channel again. So yeah, that's it. Until next time, I might drop one more short video, like I mentioned before, as far as debunking Queen myths and maybe some pet peeves about Queen that I like to talk about. But it'll just be a fun little video. And then after that, it's going to be in the Queen one. And hopefully, especially through the summer months, I get some time off coming up. I really want to push this channel, so I need your help. I need you to subscribe, recommend me to some friends, or share, however it works. And yeah, let's grow together. So again, I'm Dark Helmet. This was my argument for Queen being the greatest of all time. So join the Dark Souls, join the channel. Let's work on this together. Let's have some fun, and we'll see you next time.